A dramatic royal encounter. Queen Camilla confronts a guard. The morning fog hung thick over Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla stepped out of her private chambers at precisely 7:45 a.m. She wore an elegant cream-colored coat and her signature pearl necklace, looking every bit the royal she had become. But something was different about her demeanor that morning. Her jaw was set firm, her eyes focused with unusual intensity. The staff who had worked at the castle for decades could sense it immediately. The queen consort was on a mission. Nobody knew it yet, but within the next hour, an incident would unfold that would send shockwaves through the royal household and eventually make headlines around the world. It would involve a simple guardsman, a breach of protocol so severe that it couldn't be ignored, and a response from Queen Camilla that would reveal a side of her the public had never seen before. The story really began 3 days earlier, though most people didn't connect the dots until much later. Queen Camilla had been reviewing security footage from the castle's eastern wing, something she rarely did herself. But she had reasons to be concerned. There had been whispers among the staff, nervous glances exchanged between senior household members, and a tension in the air that even the most junior servants could feel. What she saw on that footage made her blood run cold. A member of the King's Guard, a man entrusted with protecting the royal family, was engaging in behavior that violated every code and oath he had sworn to uphold. But it wasn't what most people would expect. This wasn't about sleeping on duty or being improperly dressed. What this guard was doing was far more troubling, far more personal, and far more dangerous. The guard in question was Corporal James Mitchell, a decorated serviceman with 8 years of exemplary service. He came from a military family, had served in Afghanistan, and had been personally selected for the prestigious position of serving in the King's Guard. His record was spotless. His references were impeccable. On paper, he was the model soldier. But cameras don't lie, and what those cameras captured over several nights told a very different story. Queen Camilla watched the footage alone in her study, her tea growing cold beside her. She watched as Corporal Mitchell, during his night shifts, repeatedly entered areas of the castle he had no authorization to access. She saw him lingering near the private apartments, saw him attempting to open doors, saw him using his security clearance to bypass certain checkpoints. Most disturbing of all, she saw him photographing documents, rooms, and layouts with his personal mobile phone. The queen consort's first instinct was to immediately alert security, to have the man arrested and removed. But something made her pause. She was no stranger to palace intrigue, having lived through decades of intense media scrutiny and public judgment. She had learned that sometimes the most effective response isn't the quickest one. Sometimes you need to understand the full picture before you act. So she did something unusual. She began her own quiet investigation. She spoke discreetly with senior staff members, asking casual questions about Corporal Mitchell. She reviewed his work schedules, his rotation patterns, his associations with other staff members. She even had her personal secretary make subtle inquiries with his commanding officers. What she discovered painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Corporal Mitchell had been acting strangely for the past 6 weeks. He had become withdrawn from his fellow guardsmen, declining invitations to their usual gatherings. He had been seen making frequent phone calls during his breaks, always walking away to ensure privacy. His bank account, which palace security had quietly checked after the initial footage was discovered, showed several large deposits that didn't match his military salary. Someone was paying him, and paying him well. The pieces were falling into place, but Queen Camilla needed more. She needed to catch him in the act, to understand the full scope of what he was doing and who he was working with. So she made a decision that surprised even her closest advisors when they learned about it later. She would confront him herself, not through intermediaries, not through security chiefs or military police, but face to face. She would look him in the eye and demand answers. Her staff tried to talk her out of it. It was too dangerous, they said. It was beneath her station. It could create a public relations nightmare if word got out. But Queen Camilla was resolute. She had spent years being defined by others, judged by others, underestimated by others. This was her home now, her family she was protecting, and she would handle it her way. She chose the morning of March 15th for the confrontation. She knew from studying his schedule that Corporal Mitchell would be stationed at the eastern checkpoint at 8:00 a.m. sharp. She knew the location was relatively private, away from the main tourist areas but still within the castle grounds where other security personnel could intervene if needed. She had arranged for plainclothes security to be nearby, close enough to help if necessary but far enough not to interfere with what she needed to do. As she walked through the castle's corridors that morning, passing portraits of queens and kings who had faced their own crises and controversies, Queen Camilla thought about her journey to this moment. She had been vilified, celebrated, criticized, and defended. She had been called the other woman, the mistress, the home wrecker. She had endured decades of public scorn before finally, slowly, earning a measure of acceptance. She had married the love of her life and become queen consort of the United Kingdom. And now, she was about to defend her home and her family in a way that no one would expect. The eastern checkpoint came into view. Corporal Mitchell stood at attention, his red uniform immaculate, his bearing military perfect. He didn't see her approaching at first. He was looking down at something in his hand, something he quickly pocketed when he sensed movement. By the time he looked up and registered who was walking toward him, it was too late to compose himself completely. For just a fraction of a second, Queen Camilla saw something flash across his face. Was it guilt? Fear? Calculation? She stopped 3 feet in front of him. The morning sun had broken through the fog now, casting long shadows across the ancient stone walls. Somewhere in the distance, a clock tower chimed 8 times. Corporal Mitchell snapped to attention, his salute crisp and proper. But his eyes couldn't quite meet hers, and his jaw was clenched just a bit too tight. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady but lacking its usual confidence. Queen Camilla didn't return the greeting. Instead, she stood there, letting the silence stretch out, watching him, studying him. She had learned this technique from watching her husband navigate difficult conversations. Sometimes silence is more powerful than any words. Sometimes making someone wait, making them wonder what you know, is the best way to crack their composure. Corporal Mitchell's facade began to crumble almost immediately. A bead of sweat formed on his temple despite the cool morning air. His hands, held rigidly at his sides, began to tremble almost imperceptibly. His breathing became slightly faster, slightly shallower. He knew. Somehow, he knew that she knew. "We need to talk, Corporal Mitchell," Queen Camilla finally said, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority. "And you're going to tell me everything." What happened in the next few minutes would shock everyone who eventually learned about it. The revelations would be stunning, the implications far-reaching, and Queen Camilla's handling of the situation would forever change how people viewed her. But in that moment, standing in the morning light with a disgraced guardsman before her, she was simply a woman protecting her home, and she was about to show a strength that would leave everyone who witnessed it absolutely stunned. The confrontation was about to begin, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Corporal Mitchell's military training kicked in, but it was fighting against his rising panic. Queen Camilla watched the internal struggle play out across his face, and she knew she had him. Years of navigating the complex world of royal politics had taught her to read people, to see past their masks, and right now she could see that this young man was caught between confession and denial, truth and lies. "I don't understand, Your Majesty," he finally managed to say, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. It was a weak opening and they both knew it. Queen Camilla tilted her head slightly, her expression remaining neutral but her eyes sharp as diamonds. "Don't insult my intelligence, Corporal. We both know exactly what this is about." She took one step closer, and he instinctively took a half step back before catching himself. "The question is whether you're going to make this harder on yourself than it needs to be." The color drained from Mitchell's face. His mind was clearly racing, calculating his options, trying to figure out how much she knew, how much he could still hide. But Queen Camilla wasn't going to give him time to construct a believable lie. She had spent too many years watching skilled liars work their craft in palace halls. She knew all the tricks. "Let me tell you what I know," she continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. "And then you can decide whether honesty or continued deception is your best path forward." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "For the past 6 weeks, you've been accessing areas of this castle you have no authorization to enter. You've been photographing documents, floor plans, and private areas. You've been receiving money from an unknown source. And last night, you attempted to access the private study adjacent to the king's chambers." Mitchell's knees actually buckled slightly at that last revelation. He hadn't known about the hidden cameras in that corridor. His hand went unconsciously to his pocket where his phone was concealed, the phone that contained dozens of photographs he had been instructed to take. "I can explain," he whispered, his military bearing completely shattered now. "Then explain," Queen Camilla commanded. "But choose your words very carefully, because what you say in the next few minutes will determine whether you leave this castle in handcuffs or whether there might be another way to handle this." That last part surprised him. His eyes snapped up to meet hers for the first time, searching her face for any sign of what she meant. A way out. Was she offering him mercy? But why? The confusion in his eyes was genuine, and for the first time, Queen Camilla felt a slight crack in her anger. This wasn't a hardened criminal standing before her. This was a young man, probably no more than 28 or 29, who had made a terrible mistake and was now drowning in the consequences. "It started with my sister," Mitchell began, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked around nervously as if afraid of being overheard despite the relative privacy of their location. "She has a daughter, my niece Emma. She's 6 years old. Beautiful little girl, loves horses and drawing and—" His voice broke, "and she's sick. Very sick." Queen Camilla's expression softened slightly, though she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "The doctors say she needs a specialized treatment. It's not available on the NHS, and it costs more than my sister could ever afford. More than our whole family could afford together. £200,000. We tried everything: fundraisers, charity appeals, loans. We raised maybe 30,000, but it wasn't enough, and Emma's getting worse." Tears were forming in the corners of Mitchell's eyes now, but he blinked them back, his military discipline reasserting itself even in this moment of vulnerability. "Then someone contacted me. I don't even know who they really are. It was through encrypted messages, untraceable. They knew about Emma, knew about the money we needed, knew everything about my family. And they made me an offer." "Photographs," Queen Camilla said quietly. "They wanted photographs of the castle, the layouts, the security measures." Mitchell nodded miserably. "They said it was for a book, a detailed historical book about the royal residences. They said they were willing to pay £250,000 for exclusive photographs and information. They said it was all legal, that many staff members had done similar things before." He looked up at her with desperate eyes. "I knew it was wrong. I knew it from the beginning. But Emma, she's dying, Your Majesty. Without that treatment, the doctors give her maybe 6 more months. What would you have done?" The question hung in the air between them. Queen Camilla felt her anger warring with an unwelcome surge of sympathy. She was a grandmother herself. She understood that desperate love, that willingness to do almost anything to protect a child. But she also understood the gravity of what Mitchell had done, the security breach he had created, the trust he had violated. "Who are they really?" she asked. "You know it's not for a book." Mitchell's shoulders slumped. "I suspected from the beginning. The questions they asked, the specific things they wanted photographed: security camera locations, blind spots, entry points, the king's daily routines. But I told myself I didn't know for certain. I told myself that maybe I was wrong, that maybe it really was just for a historical record." He laughed bitterly. "But I wasn't wrong. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was selling out my duty, my honor, everything I'd ever believed in for money." "For your niece," Queen Camilla corrected quietly. "Does the reason matter?" Mitchell asked, genuine anguish in his voice. "I've betrayed my oath. I've endangered the royal family. I deserve whatever punishment is coming." Queen Camilla was silent for a long moment, her mind working through the implications of everything she'd learned. This wasn't the simple case of greed or treachery she'd initially imagined. This was far more complex, far more human, and far more dangerous. If Mitchell had been approached by people sophisticated enough to know about his niece's illness, to know exactly how to manipulate him, then they were dealing with something much larger than one corrupted guard. "How much have you given them?" she asked. "Everything they've asked for so far. Probably 50 or 60 photographs, detailed notes about shift changes, security protocols, the locations of cameras and sensors. They've paid me in installments, £70,000 so far, with the rest promised when I deliver the final set of information." "Which is?" Mitchell hesitated, then pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "They want photos of the king's private study, the layout, the safe, the locations of the panic buttons and secure communication devices. They want it by tomorrow night." Queen Camilla felt a chill run down her spine. This was far more serious than she'd realized. Someone was planning something, and they were being methodical about it. The information Mitchell had already provided would be invaluable to anyone planning an intrusion, an attack, or even just sophisticated surveillance. And now they wanted access to the king's most private and secure space. She made her decision in that moment. It was risky, perhaps even reckless, but it was the right move. She could feel it in her bones. "You're going to give them what they want," she said quietly. Mitchell's head snapped up, confusion and hope and fear all mixing in his expression. "What?" "You're going to photograph the king's study exactly as they've requested. You're going to send them the images, and you're going to arrange a meeting to collect the final payment." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But the photographs you send won't be real. They'll be carefully staged to show what we want them to see, not what's actually there. And when you meet them to collect the money, you won't be alone." Understanding dawned in Mitchell's eyes, followed quickly by terror. "You want me to help catch them, but they're dangerous. If they find out I've turned on them." "Then we make absolutely certain they don't find out until it's too late," Queen Camilla interrupted. "You've already betrayed your oath once, Corporal Mitchell. Now you have a chance to make it right, to protect the family you've endangered, and perhaps even to save your niece in the process." "How?" Mitchell asked. "The money won't be real if this is a trap." Queen Camilla smiled then, a small, knowing smile that held more steel than warmth. "Who said the money won't be real? You'll get every penny they promised you. Consider it payment for helping us catch whoever is behind this. Your niece will get her treatment and you'll get a chance at redemption. But if you betray us again, if you warn them or deviate from the plan in any way, I will personally ensure that you spend the rest of your life in prison. Do we understand each other?" Mitchell stared at her in shock. He had expected arrest, disgrace, the complete destruction of his life and career. Instead, he was being offered something he never could have imagined, a second chance. But the steel in Queen Camilla's eyes told him she meant every word of her threat as well. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do this for me?" Queen Camilla was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. "Because I understand what it means to be judged for your mistakes, to have your entire life defined by the worst things you've done. And because I'm a grandmother who knows that there's very little I wouldn't do to save a child I love." Her eyes hardened again. "But make no mistake, this is not forgiveness. This is a transaction. You work with us to catch these people, and in return, you get the money for Emma's treatment. After that, you'll resign from the Guard quietly, and we'll never speak of this again." Mitchell stood straighter, some of his military bearing returning. For the first time since the conversation began, he looked her directly in the eye. "Thank you, Your Majesty. You won't regret this. I'll do whatever it takes." "I know you will," Queen Camilla said. "Because if you don't, you'll lose everything, your niece, your freedom, and any chance at redemption. Now, let's discuss exactly how this is going to work." As she began outlining her plan, several members of her plainclothes security team emerged from their concealed positions nearby. They had heard everything, recorded everything, and now they would help execute the most audacious sting operation the royal household had ever attempted. And at the center of it all was Queen Camilla, showing a side of herself that would absolutely stun everyone who eventually learned the full story. The game was on, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The next 24 hours were among the most intense in Queen Camilla's life, and that was saying something considering everything she had endured over the decades. She had assembled a small team of absolutely trusted individuals: her personal security chief Marcus Webb, the head of Royal Protection David Garrison, and surprisingly, her own private secretary Alina Hartley, who had worked in intelligence before joining the royal household. Together with Corporal Mitchell, they worked around the clock to set the trap. The king himself didn't know what was happening. Queen Camilla had made that decision deliberately. Charles worried, especially about security matters, and she knew he would either want to shut down the entire operation or insist on bringing in MI5 and turning it into a massive official investigation. But Camilla had learned something important during her years in the royal family. Sometimes the most effective action is the most discreet. Besides, she wanted to handle this herself. This was her moment to prove not just to others, but to herself that she was more than just a consort, more than just the woman who had married the king. She was a protector of this family, and she would act like it. The staging of the king's study was meticulous. They photographed it from every angle first, documenting its true layout. Then they systematically altered it. The safe was moved to a different wall, or rather, a fake safe was installed while the real one was concealed. Panic buttons were relocated, with dummy buttons placed in the photographed positions. Security cameras were repositioned, and the photographs would show gaps in coverage that didn't actually exist. Anyone planning an intrusion based on these photos would find themselves walking into a very different reality than they expected. Corporal Mitchell worked alongside them, his hands steady despite his obvious fear. He had fully committed now, understanding that this was his only path forward. Alina Hartley had already verified that his niece Emma's condition was exactly as he described. Medical records confirmed the diagnosis, confirmed the need for the expensive treatment, confirmed that time was running out. It made his betrayal more understandable, if not forgivable. "They're going to ask questions," Mitchell said as they arranged the final photographs. "They're sophisticated. They'll notice if things look staged." "Then make sure they don't look staged," Marcus Webb replied, adjusting a lamp to create more natural shadows. "These people approached you because you're a professional soldier with access. They'll expect professional quality intelligence. Give them exactly that, just not the truth." The photographs were taken using Mitchell's own phone, just as he'd done before. Every image was carefully composed to look candid, hastily snapped during a brief moment of access. Nothing could appear too perfect or too deliberate. When they were done, they had 37 photographs that showed comprehensive details of a room that no longer existed in the configuration captured. That evening, Mitchell sent the images through the encrypted messaging app his mysterious contacts had provided. The response came within minutes. "Excellent work. Final payment will be delivered tomorrow night, 11 p.m. Victoria Park, northeast corner near the lake. Come alone. Bring all physical notes and any other documentation. Once confirmed, money will be transferred to the account we discussed." Queen Camilla read the message over Mitchell's shoulder, her expression unreadable. Victoria Park, public enough to seem safe, isolated enough at night to avoid witnesses. Smart. These people knew what they were doing. "What if they just kill me?" Mitchell asked quietly. "Take the information and eliminate the loose end." "They won't," Alina Hartley said with certainty. "They're paying you because they want to establish you as an ongoing asset. This won't be the last time they need information from inside the palace. They'll want you comfortable, trusting, eager for the next payday. The real danger comes after, when you become a liability." The words hung heavy in the room. Mitchell swallowed hard but nodded. He understood the game now. The next day dragged by with agonizing slowness. Queen Camilla went through her scheduled engagements with her usual grace, a charity luncheon, a meeting with representatives from a literacy foundation, tea with a visiting dignitary. But her mind was elsewhere, running through every possible scenario, every way the evening could go wrong. She had arranged for elite surveillance teams to be positioned around Victoria Park hours before the meeting. Plainclothes officers would be scattered throughout the area. Technical teams would be monitoring all electronic communications within a 3-block radius. Nothing was being left to chance. At 9 p.m., she did something that surprised even her inner circle. She insisted on being present at the Operations Command Center, an unmarked van parked 2 streets from Victoria Park. Marcus Webb had protested vigorously, arguing it was too dangerous, too improper, too likely to create a diplomatic incident if anything went wrong. But Queen Camilla had been adamant. She had started this. She would see it through. Now she sat in that van, wearing casual clothes she'd borrowed from Eleanor dark jeans, a black jacket, a simple scarf covering her distinctive hair. She looked like any other woman in her 70s, anonymous and unremarkable. The van was filled with monitors showing feeds from multiple cameras, both fixed and mobile. She could see Victoria Park from a dozen angles, could watch as the surveillance teams took their positions, invisible among the late-night joggers and dog walkers who were actually undercover officers. Corporal Mitchell was already in position, sitting on a bench near the lake, looking nervous but not suspiciously so. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a windbreaker, and carried a backpack containing the notebooks he'd kept, detailed records of everything he'd observed and photographed over the past 6 weeks. Real intelligence, the kind that would seem valuable to whoever was buying it, but carefully curated to ensure nothing truly damaging could be extracted. 10 minutes, someone said quietly in the van. Queen Camilla's heart rate increased. She realized her palms were sweating, something that rarely happened anymore even during the most stressful public appearances. This was different. This was real danger, real stakes. At 10:57 p.m., 3 figures approached from different directions, converging on Mitchell's location with the precision of a military operation. They were good, Queen Camilla had to admit. They had clearly scouted the area beforehand, chosen their approach routes carefully, timed everything perfectly. 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed in dark, nondescript clothing. Professional, dangerous. Through the surveillance feeds, Queen Camilla watched as one of the men, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the confidence of someone with combat training, sat down next to Mitchell. The other 2 remained standing, positioned to watch for threats. The woman had her hand in her jacket pocket, almost certainly holding a weapon. This was no simple exchange of information for money. These were serious people conducting a serious operation. "Can we hear them?" Queen Camilla asked. "Working on it," a technician replied, adjusting controls. "Mitchell's wearing a wire, but there's wind interference." The audio crackled to life, broken but audible. "Brought everything," the man next to Mitchell was saying. "All of it," Mitchell replied, his voice remarkably steady. "Photos, notes, schedules, security protocols, everything you asked for. The study photos, they're legitimate. Taken this morning. I had a 2-minute window when the room was empty, nearly got caught by one of the cleaning staff." The man smiled, seemingly satisfied. "You've done well, James, very well. Our employers are pleased." "The money," Mitchell asked. "You said it would be in my account." "It will be, the moment we verify these materials are genuine." The man took the backpack, opened it, began rifling through the contents. The woman with her hand in her pocket moved closer, her eyes scanning the park constantly. Professional paranoia, good tradecraft. "They're checking the notebooks," Eleanor whispered beside Queen Camilla. "We made sure everything in there would verify against the photos. It should pass inspection." "Should?" Queen Camilla asked sharply. "Will," Eleanor corrected. It will pass. The man finished his examination and nodded to his companions. He pulled out a phone, typed something, showed the screen to Mitchell. Transfer initiated. You'll see it in your account within 60 seconds. Mitchell pulled out his own phone, checking. Queen Camilla held her breath. The money was real, they had arranged it themselves, using untraceable channels, ensuring Mitchell would actually receive the funds for his niece's treatment. It was necessary to maintain the illusion, to ensure the suspects believed everything was proceeding normally. It's there, Mitchell said, genuine relief in his voice. That part wasn't acting. Good, the man said, standing up. We'll be in touch in a few weeks for the next assignment. There will be more money, much more, if you continue to deliver quality intelligence. Next assignment, Mitchell asked right on script. Of course, you don't think this is over, do you? The man smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. You work for us now, James. You took our money. You gave us information that could land you in prison for treason. Your hours completely and permanently. And you'll do exactly what we tell you to do when we tell you to do it. The mask had dropped. The friendly facade was gone. This was the threat Alina had predicted, the moment when Mitchell would understand he'd sold not just information but his entire future. And if I refuse? Mitchell asked, a slight tremor in his voice. The woman spoke for the first time, her accent vaguely Eastern European. Then we send copies of everything you've given us to MI5 with your name attached, and we make sure your sister knows it was your greed that condemned her daughter to death when the scandal destroys any chance of getting the money for treatment. She leaned in close. We own you. Don't forget it. In the van, Queen Camilla's jaw tightened. This was it. This was the moment to act. Take them, she said quietly. Marcus Webb spoke into his radio. All units execute now. Green light, green light. What happened next was coordinated chaos. The surveillance teams converged from all directions simultaneously. The two standby suspects reacted instantly, the woman pulling her gun, the second man spinning to face the threat. But they were already surrounded by armed officers, red laser sights dotting their bodies, commands to drop weapons and get on the ground echoing through the park. The man who had been talking to Mitchell tried to run, but 3 officers tackled him within 5 steps. He went down hard, and within seconds was face down with his hands secured behind his back. The woman made a more serious attempt at resistance, actually raising her weapon, but a taser put her down before she could fire a shot. The second man simply froze and surrendered, recognizing the futility of resistance. It was over in less than 30 seconds. 3 suspects in custody, no shots fired, no casualties. A textbook operation. In the van, Queen Camilla released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. But even as relief washed over her, she knew this was just the beginning. These 3 people were operatives, not masterminds. Someone had sent them, someone was paying them, someone had known exactly how to manipulate Corporal Mitchell. The real question was who, and why, and what they had ultimately been planning. Those answers would come, but not tonight. Tonight, Queen Camilla allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. She had protected her family, caught the conspirators, and saved a little girl's life in the process. Not bad for a woman many people still thought of as just the king's second wife. Your Majesty, Marcus Webb said, turning to face her with an expression of profound respect. That was extraordinary. That was necessary, Queen Camilla replied. Now let's find out who's behind this. The night was far from over, and the most shocking revelations were still to come. The interrogation rooms at MI5 headquarters in Thames House were designed to be intimidating, windowless, soundproof, equipped with cameras that captured every micro-expression. Queen Camilla had never expected to find herself in one, sitting across from a suspected foreign operative while senior intelligence officials watched through one-way glass. But at 2 a.m., that's exactly where she was, and she had no intention of leaving until she had answers. The man who had approached Corporal Mitchell called himself Anton Kessler, though that was certainly an alias. He was in his early 40s, fit and composed despite being in custody. He had invoked his right to an attorney, remained silent during the initial questioning, and seemed prepared to wait out his interrogators indefinitely. He was a professional, trained to resist exactly this kind of pressure. But then Queen Camilla had walked into the room, and his composure had cracked, just for a moment. His eyes had widened, genuine shock registering on his face. Whatever he had expected, it wasn't this. The Queen Consort of the United Kingdom, sitting down across from him in a secure interrogation facility, was clearly not part of his contingency planning. "Mr. Kessler," she began, her voice calm and conversational, as if they were discussing the weather over tea. "Or whatever your real name is, I want to tell you a story about choices and consequences." He said nothing, just stared at her with carefully controlled expression. But she could see his mind working, trying to figure out what game was being played. 30 years ago, Queen Camilla continued, I made some choices that I knew would have consequences. I knew people would judge me, hate me, condemn me. I accepted that because I believed in something greater than public opinion. I believed in love, in commitment, in following your heart even when the whole world tells you you're wrong. She leaned forward slightly. But I also learned something important during those years of being vilified by the press and the public. I learned that the truth matters. I learned that context matters. And I learned that everyone, even people who have made terrible mistakes, deserves a chance to tell their story. She let that hang in the air for a moment, watching his reaction. Something flickered in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or calculation. "The woman you were working with, the one who threatened Corporal Mitchell's sister and niece. She's currently telling us a very interesting story about an organization that specializes in recruiting vulnerable people in positions of access, about how they research targets exhaustively, find their pressure points, their weaknesses, their desperation, about how they've been running similar operations across Europe for the past 3 years. Queen Camilla smiled slightly. She's cooperating fully in exchange for certain considerations. Witness protection, reduced charges, a new identity, the usual arrangements. This was mostly a bluff. The woman, who had identified herself as Katia Volkov, had remained silent so far. But Kessler didn't know that, and Queen Camilla could see the doubt creeping into his expression. The first rule of intelligence work: never fully trust your partners, because they'll sell you out the moment it serves their interests. "Here's what I know," Queen Camilla continued. "You're a middle manager in whatever organization you work for. Not at the top, but not at the bottom either. You run operations, recruit assets, collect intelligence. But you're not making the big decisions, and you're definitely not getting the big payoffs. You're expendable, Mr. Kessler. And your employers will absolutely throw you away to protect themselves and whatever they were really planning." She sat back, letting him process that. "Or you can make a different choice. You can tell us what we need to know, who you work for, what they were planning, what other operations might be in play, and in return we can discuss arrangements similar to what Ms. Volkov is receiving." "She's told you nothing," Kessler said suddenly, his voice carrying a faint accent that might have been German or Dutch or something else entirely. "Because there's nothing to tell. This was a simple intelligence-gathering operation, freelance work, nothing more." It was the first time he'd spoken, and Queen Camilla felt a small surge of victory. Once they started talking, once they started defending themselves, the wall of silence began to crumble. "Freelance," she repeated. "Really? You expect me to believe that you were paying £250,000 for photographs and schedules out of your own pocket? Come now, Mr. Kessler. We both know someone was bankrolling this operation, and someone had specific reasons for wanting that particular intelligence." "Lots of people would pay for information about royal security," Kessler replied. "Tabloids, true crime writers, even security consultants looking to write books about how to protect the famous. It doesn't mean there was some grand conspiracy." Queen Camilla smiled, and there was something almost predatory in it. That might be believable if you've been asking for general information, but you weren't. You specifically wanted details about the king's private study, the locations of panic buttons and secure communication devices, blind spots in security camera coverage. That's not information for a book, Mr. Kessler. That's information for planning an intrusion or an attack. She pulled out a tablet that had been sitting on the table and turned it to face him. On the screen was a series of photographs, surveillance images of Kessler and his team over the past several weeks, meeting in various locations, always careful, always professional. But what made Kessler's face go pale was the last photograph. It showed him meeting with a man in an expensive suit outside a restaurant in Zurich. The man's face was clearly visible. "Do you know who that is?" Queen Camilla asked quietly. Kessler said nothing, but she could see the answer in his eyes. He knew exactly who it was. That's Mikhail Sokolov, a known Russian intelligence operative who was expelled from the UK 2 years ago for activities incompatible with his diplomatic status. He's also been linked to at least 3 assassination plots across Europe. She let that sink in. So this wasn't about gathering intelligence for some harmless book. This was about providing information to people planning something very specific and very dangerous. The room was silent for a long moment. Kessler was struggling now, she could see it. The careful facade was crumbling, and underneath it was something that looked almost like fear. "They'll kill me if I talk," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "They'll kill you anyway," Queen Camilla replied bluntly. "You're in custody. You're a liability now. The moment you were arrested, you became expendable. Your only chance at survival is our protection, and you only get that if you cooperate fully." She stood up then, preparing to leave, letting him think about what she'd said. But at the door, she turned back. "I'm giving you 1 hour to decide. After that, we move forward with the assumption that you're not going to help us, which means you're charged with conspiracy to commit terrorism, attempted espionage, and a dozen other charges that will put you in prison for the rest of your life. 1 hour, Mr. Kessler. Choose wisely." Outside the interrogation room, she found David Garrison waiting, his expression grave. "Your Majesty, we've been going through the phones and devices we confiscated. The encryption is sophisticated, but our technical team has managed to crack some of it." "And?" Queen Camilla asked, though she could tell from his tone that what he'd found wasn't good news. "There were at least 5 other operations running simultaneously. Similar patterns: find someone with access, find their vulnerability, exploit it ruthlessly. We have names, locations, partial information, but it's clear this was part of something much larger." Queen Camilla felt a chill run down her spine. How much larger? "We're still piecing it together, but it looks like a coordinated intelligence-gathering operation targeting multiple high-value sites across the UK. Royal residences, government buildings, military installations. Someone was building a comprehensive picture of our security infrastructure." He paused. "But here's the thing that's really concerning us. It's not just about gathering information. Several of the communications we've decrypted make reference to a timeline, to something happening in April." "April?" Queen Camilla repeated. "It's April now." "Exactly. Whatever they were planning, it's imminent." Back in her makeshift office at MI5 headquarters, Queen Camilla sat down heavily. It was nearly 4 a.m., and exhaustion was beginning to set in, but her mind was racing. What had started as her catching a disloyal guardsman had uncovered something far more extensive and far more dangerous, and now time was running out. Her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Webb. "Kessler is ready to talk, says he wants to speak to you directly." She stood, straightening her borrowed jacket, and headed back to the interrogation room. When she entered, Kessler looked up at her, and she could see that whatever internal battle he'd been fighting, one side had won. "I'll tell you everything," he said, "but you need to understand stopping what's already in motion may be impossible. They've been planning this for over a year, and they're very, very good at what they do. "Then you'd better start talking," Queen Camilla said, sitting down across from him. "And you'd better talk fast." What Kessler revealed over the next 2 hours would shock the intelligence community and set off one of the largest security operations in British history. But it would also reveal something else, a connection that no one had anticipated, a betrayal that cut close to home, and a conspiracy that reached far higher than anyone had imagined. And at the center of unraveling it all was Queen Camilla, the woman many had dismissed as merely decorative, proving that she was far more formidable than anyone had ever given her credit for. The revelations were just beginning, and the most stunning truth was still to come. The sun was rising over London when Kessler finished his confession, and Queen Camilla felt like she'd aged a decade in a single night. What he'd revealed was almost too massive to comprehend. A network of compromised individuals spanning across the British security apparatus, all feeding information to what appeared to be a sophisticated foreign intelligence operation. But it was the final piece of information he provided that had left everyone in the room stunned into silence. "The coordinator," Kessler had said, his voice hollow with resignation. "The person who managed all the British operations, who selected the targets, who knew exactly who to compromise and how to do it. They're not external. They're already inside the royal household." The implications were staggering. Someone with intimate knowledge of palace operations, someone trusted, someone who had been playing a long game while hiding in plain sight. Kessler claimed he'd never met this person face to face, had only communicated through encrypted channels, but he'd been given a code name, Nightingale. Now, 12 hours later, Queen Camilla sat in a secure conference room at Buckingham Palace with an assembled team that included the heads of MI5 and MI6, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, and her own inner circle. The king had finally been briefed on everything, and his face was pale with shock and anger. But he had deferred to Camilla's leadership on this matter, recognizing that she had earned the right to see it through. "We've been analyzing the pattern of information that was leaked," the MI5 director was saying, pulling up documents on the large screen. Nightingale had access to incredibly sensitive material schedules, security protocols, personal information about family members. The list of people who could access all of this information is very small. "How small?" the king asked, his voice tight. "Fewer than 20 people in the entire household. We're working on narrowing it down further, but it will take time to investigate each one without alerting the suspect." "We don't have time," Queen Camilla said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Kessler said whatever they're planning is happening this month. If we spend weeks investigating, we might miss our window to stop it. "What do you suggest?" the MI6 director asked. Queen Camilla was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she looked up, and there was a determined set to her jaw that her team had come to recognize. "We set a trap. We feed false information through channels that Nightingale would have access to, something too important for them to ignore. When they pass it along, we trace the communication and identify them." "That's risky," David Garrison said. "If they're as sophisticated as we think, they might detect the trap." "Then we make it convincing," Queen Camilla replied. "We make them believe they've stumbled onto something so valuable that they can't resist taking the risk." Over the next 3 days, they constructed an elaborate deception. False documents were created suggesting that the king would be making an unexpected visit to a military installation in Scotland, traveling with minimal security due to the sensitive nature of the visit. The documents were detailed, convincing, and placed in locations where Nightingale would have access to them. Then they waited. The surveillance was comprehensive. Every member of the household staff who had the necessary security clearance was monitored around the clock. Their communications, their movements, their computer usage, everything was tracked. It was invasive and uncomfortable, but necessary. The breakthrough came on the 4th night. Eleanor Hartley burst into Queen Camilla's private sitting room, her face flushed with excitement and anger. "We've got them. They took the bait. Within the hour, Queen Camilla was looking at surveillance footage that made her stomach turn. The person accessing the false documents, photographing them with a concealed camera, was someone she had trusted, someone she had worked with for years. Sir Edmund Hartwick, the deputy master of the household, a man who had served the royal family for over 2 decades. A man who had access to virtually everything, who was present at the most sensitive meetings, who knew every secret the family had. Why? Queen Camilla asked, though she wasn't sure if she was asking Alina or herself. What could they possibly have offered him? The answer came when they raided Hartwick's private residence. Hidden in a floor safe, they found documentation that told a devastating story. Hartwick was drowning in gambling debts that had spiraled out of control over the past 5 years. He owed millions to various creditors, some of them quite dangerous. The Foreign Intelligence Service had approached him 2 years ago, offering to clear his debts in exchange for information. At first, it had been small things, harmless details that seemed meaningless. But gradually, they had drawn him deeper until there was no way out. The arrest happened at dawn. Queen Camilla insisted on being present, though she remained out of sight. She watched as Hartwick was led out of his home in handcuffs, his face a mask of shame and defeat. He had betrayed everything for money, had endangered the lives of people who trusted him, and now he would pay the price. But catching Hartwick was only part of the puzzle. They still didn't know what the ultimate plan was, what all this gathered intelligence was meant to facilitate. Hartwick, when questioned, claimed he didn't know. He had simply passed along information and received payments. He had never asked what it was for, had deliberately chosen not to know because that made it easier to rationalize what he was doing. It was Corporal Mitchell, of all people, who provided the final piece. He had been working closely with the intelligence services since the night of the arrest, going through everything he'd been asked to photograph, every question he'd been asked to answer. And he noticed something: the analysts had missed a pattern in the information requested. They weren't just gathering general security information, he explained to Queen Camilla during a debriefing. They were mapping specific vulnerabilities for specific dates. Look at these questions about the King's schedule for April 23rd, about security protocols for public appearances, about emergency evacuation routes at Westminster Abbey. Queen Camilla felt her blood run cold. April 23rd, St. George's Day. The King was scheduled to attend a major service at Westminster Abbey, one of the most high-profile public appearances of the year. They're planning an attack. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of security preparations. The King wanted to cancel the event, but Queen Camilla and the security services argued against it. Canceling would tip off the plotters that their operation had been compromised, and they would simply go to ground and try again later. Better to let them move forward with their plan, but do so walking into a trap. The morning of April 23rd dawned clear and bright. Queen Camilla, dressed carefully in a blue suit and matching hat, her hands steady despite the churning in her stomach. Hundreds of armed police would be positioned throughout the area. Counterterrorism teams would be on standby. Intelligence services from 3 different countries would be monitoring communications. Every possible precaution had been taken. But as she rode in the car toward Westminster Abbey beside the King, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, that there was still a piece of the puzzle they hadn't found. The service began normally. The Abbey was filled with dignitaries, military personnel, members of the government. Everything proceeded according to schedule. Queen Camilla sat in the royal pew, hyper-aware of every movement around her, every face in the crowd, every sound that seemed out of place. Halfway through the service, Marcus Webb's voice came through the tiny earpiece she was wearing. "We have movement. 3 individuals matching the description of known operatives have been spotted near the Abbey. Armed response teams are moving to intercept." Queen Camilla's hand found the King's and squeezed it gently. He glanced at her, understanding in his eyes. This was it. But then something unexpected happened. One of the clergy members, a bishop who had been part of the service planning for months, stumbled while walking toward the altar. It seemed like a simple trip, an embarrassing but harmless moment. Except Queen Camilla noticed something that others might have missed. The way he fell was wrong, too controlled, too deliberate. And when he hit the ground, his robes fell open slightly, revealing something strapped to his chest. "Bomb!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the sacred space like a knife. "Everyone out now." The next few minutes were chaos. Security personnel flooded the abbey, hustling the king and other high-value targets toward the exits. The bishop, or whoever he really was immediately surrounded by armed officers. Outside, the 3 suspicious individuals were taken into custody as they attempted to approach the building. It was later determined that the plan had been multi-layered. The 3 operatives outside were meant to be a distraction, drawing security attention outward, while the real threat came from within. The fake bishop had been inserted months earlier, replacing the real clergyman who had been kidnapped and was later found alive in a cottage in Wales. The bomb he carried was sophisticated enough to have caused massive casualties. But it had failed, because Queen Camilla had been watching, had been alert, had trusted her instincts when something seemed wrong. Her shout had saved dozens, possibly hundreds of lives. In the aftermath, as she sat in a secure room at Scotland Yard giving her statement, the full weight of everything that had happened finally hit her. She had started this journey by confronting a single guard about unauthorized photographs. That confrontation had unraveled a conspiracy involving foreign intelligence services, corrupted officials, and a plot that could have resulted in one of the most devastating attacks in British history. The media coverage, when the story finally broke weeks later, was extraordinary. Queen Camilla was portrayed as a hero, a vigilant protector who had uncovered the plot and personally saved the king and countless others. The narrative of her as merely a controversial consort was forever shattered, replaced by a new understanding of her strength, intelligence, and dedication to duty. But for Queen Camilla herself, sitting in her private chambers at Windsor Castle a month after everything had concluded, the victory felt bittersweet. Corporal Mitchell had resigned from the guard as agreed, but his niece Emma was undergoing her treatment and showing positive results. Hartwick was awaiting trial, his life and legacy in ruins. The foreign operatives were being quietly dealt with through diplomatic channels and intelligence exchanges. She thought about the morning she had confronted Mitchell at the eastern checkpoint, how angry she had been, how certain of his betrayal. She had learned so much since then, about the complexity of human motivation, about the gray areas between right and wrong, about the courage it takes to choose redemption over revenge. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was the king, carrying 2 cups of tea. He sat down beside her and they were quiet for a moment. "You saved us all," he said finally. "I hope you know that." Queen Camilla smiled slightly. "I just did what needed to be done." "No," the king replied firmly. "You did what no one else could have done. You trusted your instincts, you made hard choices, you showed mercy where others would have shown only judgment, and you remained vigilant when it mattered most." He took her hand. "You are exactly the queen consort this country needs. I've always known it, but now the whole world knows it too." She leaned her head on his shoulder, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability after weeks of strength. "I was terrified the entire time," she admitted quietly. "I know," he said. "That's what made it brave." Outside, the sun was setting over the castle grounds, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Queen Camilla thought about all the years she had endured judgment and criticism, all the times she had doubted herself, all the moments when she had wondered if she would ever truly be accepted. This experience hadn't erased all of that, but it had changed something fundamental. She had proven to herself more than anyone else that she was capable of extraordinary things when the situation demanded it. The confrontation with a single guard had led to the discovery of a massive conspiracy. Her decision to show mercy to Corporal Mitchell had led to catching the real villains. Her insistence on being personally involved had led to saving countless lives. And through it all, she had shown a side of herself that would stun everyone who learned the full story: strength, wisdom, courage, and compassion in equal measure. Queen Camilla closed her eyes and allowed herself to finally relax. The crisis was over, the danger had passed, and she had emerged not just intact but transformed. She was no longer just the woman who had married the king. She was a protector, a leader, a force to be reckoned with in her own right. And that, she realized with quiet satisfaction, was the most stunning revelation of all.